We are back with our second official episode. I'm in my office hanging out with a staff member that's going to introduce themselves shortly. It is Folklore, our second episode of our municipal podcast focusing on all things Norfolk County. And I'm going to pass it over to you. Who are you? What do you do? And why should the people of Norfolk County care?
Okay, that's a great question. So my name is Amy Fanning, and I am the Treasurer and the Director of Financial Management and Planning for Norfolk County. So that means that I oversee all of our financial operations. And so we work with collecting and billing of property taxes. We build your rate budget, your operating budget, and your capital budget each year. And so how the funds are collected and how they are used and how we fund things, that all flows through my area. So those are big things that everyone I think should care about, because your tax dollars are important and how they get used should be used in the best of our ability to meet the needs of the community.
Arguably, probably one of the most important roles in the municipality, because everything we do is funded by public tax dollars, and we wouldn't determine what we fund and how we fund it if it wasn't for you and your team.
Yeah, we take great pride and feel a lot of sense of responsibility in making sure that everything that we do handles the funds to the best of our ability to do the best that we can with each dollar.
Yeah, for sure. So it's not just like a regular walk in the park being in the finance team. It's not like it's a for-profit business per se. The municipality has a lot of rules and regulations, and I'm still on my 5th year learning stuff every single budget. Every single year I'm learning new things about our responsibilities and legislative requirements and where funds are coming from. So how does somebody become treasurer? And then further to that, how did you become our treasurer?
So that's a great question too, and there is a very big difference between the private sector and the public sector and how things are treated. It's actually a completely different set of accounting standards that we use. So the only way that you can really work up to it is through experience in the public sector. And so I did 2 summers as a summer student with Norfolk County when I was growing up in the area, and went away to the private sector for a number of years, and then decided that, if I could make a difference in the community where I want to be, that's what I wanted to do. So I came back. And so before becoming treasurer, I had a little over a decade of experience in the finance department here, which, as you alluded to, allows you to gain experience with the many different layers of legislation that we deal with and how we work with different levels of government and how we can best serve our community.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Like to think that you'd invest in a career in the public sector, which is admirable and seriously a lot of work, and you guys work really hard. And you're not like elected officials that, even though we get crapped on, we also get praised. And staff just kind of fly under the radar for the most part. I know you have a lot of bad days, but you don't really get the public like shouting you out for the good work you do either. And you guys work really, really hard, but you're investing in like, a lot of years in a public sector career. Is that totally transferable over to the private sector? Like, is your experience, comparable to someone who's put the same amount of time in the public realm as the private sector if you were to leave Norfolk County tomorrow, which you're not permitted to do ever? So what's that like on a resume? What does that look like?
Yeah, it would certainly be a challenge. I think that, so I'm a chartered professional accountant, so using that as a base, certainly having that designation helps you in the private sector if you were to leave and look elsewhere, but my experience wouldn't be transferable directly in a number of ways. I spent a lot of time learning about legislation that people in the private sector don't even know exists,
Right.
in all likelihood.
Yeah.
And the way that we account for things and the way that we manage things is very different. And we have to have a balanced budget, for example. Right. Every dollar has to be accounted for. And in the private sector, that's not the way that you would build your budgets for the year if you were with a for-profit company. So it's a very different
mindset. And I'm sure
mindset.
You're a lot more strategic here as well. Like you're building out that capital plan, that asset management plan, which I know you're going to love to talk about later. But the capital plan, like we're building out a 10-year budget versus just the annual operating budget. And so there's a lot of balls in the air when you're building this budget. So a couple summers as a summer student, and then boom, you're treasurer, or what happens? How did you become treasurer?
So I did a couple of summers that kind of got my first taste of municipal finance, and promptly decided that was not for me. And I went back to finish school, and I spent a few years in the private sector in Toronto working for a large global Fortune 500 company, and then realized that, that's also not for me. So yeah, so not being able to retire, I decided that I would come back, and I wanted to raise my family here. I'm born and raised in Norfolk County, And I liked the idea of being able to make a difference in my community and being able to make improvement for people and in their daily lives. And we look around and we see, roads projects that we've helped to fund, or we see that, a grant put to work that we've helped to negotiate and completed the reporting on, and you were able to work with people to help projects come along that make a difference for people, and that's really important. And so working for the municipality, I came back and I spent several years working in the budget area, and then a number of years as the deputy treasurer, and focused on improving some of our financial processes there. And a long time working on the financial system that we currently have as well before the treasurer role came open, and I ended up here. So I bounced around a lot in finance before landing here.
And before we get into your process system, which I want to talk about, so I want to just maybe ask what you kind of do for fun. So you're in the community, and I totally agree with you. Like, the public sector has this level of fulfillment that I have not found anywhere else in anything else I've done. And I think that's like cheesy and cliche. And people say, well, like, you do it for all the right reasons, but people don't know what it's like to drive by something as simple as a road project, let alone something like, as massive as like a new healthcare facility or a recreation center or whatever it is. It's even, like a new business that you helped through that grant process, or you were there at their ceremony when you opened it. Like, this sense of fulfillment you get in connecting to the community is, yeah, there are no dollars and cents that like can make up for that in another role. But so you're committed to the community and you're in the community. So like, what about you in your personal life? Not pressing you to overshare too much, but like, who are you as a person? Who are you in Norfolk County?
Yeah, so I, born and raised here, and I really love the area. And I have two small children that my husband and I are raising in the area as well. And so we're very involved in our children's activities. So between work and my kids, that pretty much is at the point of parenting where, there's not a whole lot else going on in my life right now, but that's a good thing too. So a lot of our children's activities and helping out with them as much as I can, and then being here eats up kind of the rest of my time. But very happy to do that. I consider myself very fortunate to be here and to have this role and to do what I can with it.
Yeah, no kidding. If you're listening, if I have any listeners, I don't know, but Amy is always here. The finance team is always here. I come and go. Their cars are in the parking lot. It's still dark out after a council meeting. They're still here. The amount of work they put in, it is not a 9-to-5 job. If people think that like the public sector is some cushy role, like it is not. So shout out to you guys and the team. I know you work really hard. And you make us look good for the most part. You've got the processes in place. You've identified some solutions to the problems, but let's back it up. Give me a high-level view on Norfolk County's financial position as a corporation, as a community. How did we get here? What are we doing about it? What's the long-term plan? So you've put processes and policies in place to address some of this, but what is the problem? What are we addressing?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and there's a lot involved there. So, to give a quick preamble, we have a number of reserves that we use, and that's kind of like our savings account.
Rainy day.
So we put money into reserves over the life of our assets, and the idea is then when that asset needs replacement, the money's all there, you replace it and start the cycle all over again, and that's what you do. And so we had a number of years where we were drawing from reserves and not putting enough away to replace those. We had a number of items where the reserves were used for items that weren't their intended purpose. We had some ongoing funding that was coming from reserves without a dedicated revenue source to replace that money. We had a number of years of tax increases that were below the level of inflation. So although the costs to operate the corporation were increasing, our budgets weren't increasing at the same pace. And so we had a number of years of deficits. We also had some issues where we were spending inadequate amounts of money on the asset repair and renewal through our capital plan. So kind of a combination of all of these numbers of things came together to put us behind the 8 ball in terms of where we'd want to be in an ideal world with our savings account.
Right. So you're treasurer. We are behind the 8 ball. You're seeing this. What are you doing to council? How are you flagging this? Because it's so much more. Our finances are so much more than one budget at a time. There's so much more than one term of council at a time. And your loyalty is not to the term of council. Your loyalty is to the corporation and the community. So what are you doing as treasurer when you see this decline happening in our reserves?
Yeah, that's absolutely. So you kind of you touched on it earlier, commenting on how many balls are in the air. So there's, likewise with everything that we do, there's a number of ways that we work to address these issues, and it's kind of dependent on the issue at hand. And so right now, we're staring down a 10-year capital forecast that is so significant that the county can't afford it on its own without significant levels of funding from other levels of government. And so for folks like yourself and our senior management who are out there and working with senior levels of government to work on funding models, we're committed to giving you the best information that we can. So we're always looking at each and every process that we have, every description we put in the GL, everything that gets posted through our accounts. How can we post it faster? How can that information be better? How can we get it to council in a more timely fashion to make sure that the information that's used to make decisions is the highest quality and timeliness that it can possibly have? So that's at our forefront, because we can't expect good decision making if we can't provide good information.
That's so true. And as a council member, I can only make a decision. Like, I cannot possibly be, listen, the facts are I'm not an engineer. I didn't have a career in finance. I'm not in the public health sector. Like, I can only make decisions based on the very best information that is before me in that staff report from staff. So you have to have like this amazing relationship with your team where you trust them implicitly, and the information they're bringing you is legit and fulsome, right? Like, there's nothing else coming. So yeah, that information in a timely manner is so critical, and a really good point. But one of the things you said was about the asset management. So can we break that down for someone? Let's talk about it in the context of an arena. So tomorrow, we bought and pay for buy an arena. We have money, no problem. We got grant funding. It's paid for. What are we doing the very next day for that asset?
So that's a great question, and all municipalities are struggling with this right now. So the legislation in Ontario has recently changed, and all municipalities now must have phase one of their asset management plan in place, which is core assets. And phase two is coming on in 2024.
So roads and water for core?
Yeah, exactly. And so what that means, like in your example of an arena, let's say the arena, just for sake of a simple example, let's say the arena costs us $100 and it's going to last us 10 years. So we need to be taking $10 a year and putting it away in that reserve or that savings account, so that 10 years from now, when that arena needs to be replaced, we have the $100 sitting there to do it.
And in Norfolk's position, we don't have the money for the arena. So
That's right.
Say we went ahead with it. Say council said to you tomorrow, find us the money. We're going to build this arena. You find us the money, even though we don't have it. So it's debt, property tax increases, moving from other reserves, whatever. You pull it all together. We endorse it. So we're paying the $100 for the arena, and then we're paying the $10 for the next year to put it away. So we're almost getting the life cycle. We're paying for the life cycle of that asset 2 times,
right?
Essentially, so in 10 years.
You're paying for the debt on the arena you had to replace because you didn't have the money.
Right.
And you're trying to put away into your savings account for the next time you need it at the same time.
Right.
So it really is compounding an issue that's been building over quite a long period of time.
And it's interesting to think about, you're putting that money away now. So we're charging the taxpayers today for the arena and the debt. The debt servicing will be spread out over the next few years. The contributions for the repair of the asset will be spread out over the next few years. But we're not talking like 50 years. We're talking like 10, 20, depending on the debenture, the debt, and the repayment plan. So we are charging the taxpayers of today twice over for an asset when we're building stuff out, instead of being able to spread that out a little bit. Obviously, if it was a big project like water, we could spread that out long term. But the point I'm trying to make is the taxpayers of today are the ones who are paying for the assets and the infrastructure, instead of maybe the taxpayers of tomorrow who haven't moved here yet, but will use the asset.
Yeah, so that's the way that growth for residents that will move in comes into place, is largely through development charges. And so when we're building that arena, we might earmark a portion of that as growth. And so then that we would collect development charges on new developments and put that in a development charge reserve, which would then at some point in the future be used to offset the cost of growth assets. But through legislative changes that have come in, we've been limited and restricted in what we can collect and how we can use it. And so we're still working through a lot of that legislative change, but it does impact how we account for growth. And then to go back to your previous point as well, we're still, even with all of the increases that we've done, all the focus we've put on it, we're still not putting away as much as we're taking out of reserves right now. So it's an uphill battle, to say the least, on how we can work through that. But we are committed to bringing back information to council as regularly as possible to make sure that that debt level is monitored very closely. And for asset management planning, the financing plan portion of that legislation comes into play in 2025. So I think that's when we're going to see maybe the most challenging part of all of this process for us to accept is when that plan comes into place.
So give the example that you gave at council about our reserves. So this year or last year, it's a blur, our reserves were in the black. First year in many, many, many years that we haven't had all of our reserves in a deficit position, or most of our reserves in a deficit position. However, one of them in particular only had a little tiny bit of extra money. How much money extra was in that reserve above what we needed it to be for the year?
Yes, so that's a very good example of how thin that line is to keep those items in the black. And so it was an asset that previously we weren't required to pay deposits on these assets, but more recently, because of inflation and the backup of items, we have been required. So because we had to pay a deposit on an asset acquisition sooner than we thought, it actually brought one of our reserves down to within $22.
$22 in the bank.
Of being in the red. So it was very close. And that's, although everything's in the black and we're really proud of that, it's not comfortably so, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Right. So it's a black and white or black and red, color scheme for people to look at the books and go, oh, good, we're in the black. We've got $22 in the savings account for this particular item, and that's why we have to stay committed to topping up the reserves. In most cases, there's not enough there for us to fulfill what we need that year. Forget 2 or 3 years out. Forget if an emergency pops up and something's unbudgeted. So really, really important. One of the things you touched on is development charges, because I got this question the other day on social media, so I'm going to ask the treasurer what she thinks. Why can't we just make a developer pay for growth? They should just pay for it all. Growth pays for growth, and they need to pay. And why isn't council revisiting the development charges and just doing that?
And so there's a lot to unpack and a lot of moving pieces in the development charge legislation right now in the landscape and the way that it's rolling out. So in an ideal scenario, if we have a new subdivision coming in and they need roads and water, wastewater and streetlights and a bunch of things, that developer would just pay for all of that. But in the way it actually works, we're limited in terms of what we can collect. And we have to have a very specific mathematical function which details the amount of growth. So it might be that, a certain portion of our existing population may drive on that road, or a certain portion of our existing population may use the sidewalks, or whatever the case may be.
Or it's a commercial aspect and the people don't actually live here, but they still should be paying into development charges for like fire and EMS.
Right.
Just because they're working here, they might, or the roads, driving on the roads, right?
Right. So the way that it boils down to, although growth might be the driving factor, our existing population is benefiting from some of those assets. And so we can't collect development charges on all of that.
Right.
And now with recent developments in legislation, if we were to make changes to our development charges, we have to phase in those increases over 5 years. So immediately the phase in means that we have to fund the portion that we're not allowed to increase immediately. So
costing the taxpayer.
It really makes it very challenging. We are going to be bringing forward a new development charges background study in the next couple of years. And so we'll take time and consideration to make sure that we explain the differences at that point in time.
And we can't do that every year.
No, it's a painstaking process to go through every asset, every capital plan, every project, every master plan, and indicate what's growth related and what isn't, and it has to be earmarked in our background study in order to charge on it. So you want to do it often enough that you're catching all of the assets that are growth related, but not so often that you're spending more than what you'd be able to increase your development charges by.
Right. And then I'm off on a tangent here, but we were talking about growth and development charges and growth. And so you're the treasurer, you don't work in the planning department, but if you look at us just from your financial lens, if you look at Norfolk County, what do you think about growth? What do you think about how our community's changing and council's adopted that growth plan? Do you think, hey, what the heck are you doing, council? We're broke. We can't afford new amenities, or I'm kind of putting you on the spot, or do you think, hey, this is great. We're going to have a larger tax base, or do you think, no, that tax base is going to have needs, and we're struggling. What do you, from a financial lens only, look at growth and think about Norfolk County?
That's a super, super challenging question. And so I think that we can't not grow. We don't have the option to say no in a number of instances. And so I think it's more about how do we best prepare for what we know is coming anyway.
Right.
And we don't want to jeopardize services to our existing population. So if we have a water treatment plant that's stretched to its max, something's going to have to be done about that plant regardless.
Yeah.
Because it, is decades old and it needs to be a rehab. And so is there a benefit in building it larger to accommodate growth and collecting development charges on it and then being able to accommodate that? And I think yes, because that will then allow you to sustain the existing population as well and to maintain quality of service provision. And with all of our different assets, so like with EMS versus water versus roads versus all of the different types of services we provide, they don't all have the same tipping point. So, we know water's kind of the story in Norfolk County, and we're really close to our max, and we can't do a lot without growth and building. But we also know that we have a very extensive road network.
Right.
And so we don't need to build as many roads. So the tipping point is different for that versus where it is for water for growth. So I think that balancing act is really, really challenging as well, and where things go. But I think that there's a lot of benefits to growth if we can find a constructive path forward.
So you just touched on water. It's obviously the biggest financial project we have on our books. It's the biggest kind of buzzword around this place. So interurban water, $450 million in 2023 dollars. I don't know, and I don't want to know about 2024 dollars yet. So what's going on with that? How are we budgeting and planning for that, and how does a municipality take this on, and why is Norfolk dealing with this? This is a big problem that's going to change the financial trajectory of our community, but we're not the only municipality that has water infrastructure. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a massive, massive project. It can't be said enough times over how enormous it is. When we look at our municipality and the way that we're structured, we have 5 urban areas that are each, served by one independent water system. And so we only charge the costs related to that infrastructure to the users who use the system. So about half of our population pays for 5 independent water treatment systems. Though they're small, water infrastructure is very expensive and it's very highly regulated. So there's not an enormous amount of flexibility with ways that you can operate that infrastructure.
So half of our population is on the water system, or the rate budget that we build out every year. And so we are managing 5 water systems, and only half of our population is being charged for it, because the other half is on a private water treatment, is on a well.
Yeah, we have about half of our population is rural, and they have other sources of water, so wells or sandpoints or cisterns or whatever the case may be.
And it's an interesting point to give consideration to about the growth narrative, because that also adds more users on to stabilize rates and pay for that infrastructure specifically. But that growth might not all be in urban centers. It could be in rural communities. Typically, we'll see a lot of that infill in the urban centers, so they could be water users. But it's really interesting, because I know we have a couple council members that like to bring this debate up every year about the urban versus rural and who should pay for what. So is that why we have a separate rate budget here in Norfolk, because of the population using water and not using water?
Yeah, so we do. Most municipalities have a separate rate budget. Not all, most, but in a lot of cases, they might even present them together because it's a very similar population. But we treat ours very distinctly differently here. They're presented several months apart. Our rate budget usually comes in November, which is the water wastewater side, and our operating budget doesn't come forward till January. So they're very distinctly different entities here, and now that's because it's only about half the population that bears the cost of the rate budget.
So if I'm going to make a couple statements about interurban water so that you don't have to, and you can say you agree or you don't disagree, or you can say nothing and sit in silence, but we've got a $450 million interurban water plan on the books that council has adopted and endorsed if we get provincial and federal funding, a third and a third, roughly that 66%. If Norfolk was to go ahead with not doing interurban and repairing our separate structures, we're at about $500 million in those 2023 dollars. How does something like that bankrupt a municipality when you look at adding $500 million to a budget?
It's not impossible. I think that people, probably out there thinking municipality could never go bankrupt, but they can. It's happened. It's happened in England, fairly recently. There's been some municipalities struggling in 2023.
Yeah.
So it's absolutely possible. We're not near that. Just so everyone knows, we're not in danger. Well, we're very conscientious of making sure that doesn't happen. But certainly, taking on that level of debt is very worrisome, to say the least. And I don't think there's anybody, no matter what position you are at Norfolk County, who would be very comfortable saying that they feel great about taking that on.
Like here's my concept. We take it on at $500 million because we're not going to do interurban, because we're not growing, because we're not getting more users, because we didn't get provincial and federal dollars. And I think that our financial future is impacted indefinitely forever. I think about trying to add a new rec facility now. I think about trying to upgrade decaying infrastructure where community members are turning on their taps and the water is full of iron and rust and so on. And we don't even have the money for that. How would we ever have the money for those amenities that draw community members like physicians and young families and professionals to come and work and stay and live in Norfolk when we have an additional $500 million in debt just to fix the existing water we have?
Yeah, so I don't have the budget numbers in front of me, but certainly it is a comparable option. I think it's important for everyone to know that the dollar value that's included in our capital budget right now includes 66% funding from other levels of government, like you said. And if we don't receive those funds, then we're going to have to go back to the drawing board and figure out what we do next, because significant capital investments are coming our way on our water system, whether it's interurban or whether it's rehabbing our existing facilities or upgrading them or whatever the case may be. It's very significant, and Norfolk's on its way to becoming the municipality with the highest rate debt per capita across the province.
Scary. Not something you want to be known for.
It's absolutely not the category you want to be first in. No.
But it is the category I lead with when I meet with provincial and federal officials, because if that doesn't scream like send help, bring us home money, I don't know what does. Just a off the cuff question, what's like the biggest grant funding that you can recall we've ever received from provincial or federal dollars? Is there anything that comes to mind?
That's a good question. I know we've gotten some significant investment in some of our roads projects recently, and with the Long Point Causeway, we had some significant investments in that one. That might be the biggest I can recall off the top of my head.
That would be a big one for sure. The other road ones, we do get some investments down here, but I feel like it's terrible to say, but like it almost doesn't count when other municipalities are getting the same. What does Norfolk receive that is differentiating us? And I haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, no, to your point, I don't think that we've seen anything that would, stand out as, oh wow, like Norfolk got something really great. I think we're really kind of in line with other municipalities our size.
Okay, so we're sitting on a bunch of money in the bank, the legacy fund, but not really. So what is the legacy fund? What do we do with it? And why don't we just take it and spend it and fix up our water?
Yes, that's an excellent question. Part of our long-term financial sustainability goal was to leave the legacy fund intact. And so a number of years ago, when Norfolk County sold its hydro utility, we received $67.7 million, and we put it into a long-term investment strategy called the One Fund. And often we refer to that as the legacy fund. And so over the life of that asset, we have received interest income annually, so $2 million annually into our roads reserve. And so since the inception of the legacy fund, we've put about $18 million, just over $18 million into reserves.
Which is not coming from the taxpayer.
Correct.
So the interest on that principal is helping us top up our reserves and keep taxes low.
Yep, exactly. And another $500,000 of that's been earmarked for annually up to $5 million for the Norfolk General Hospital. And so again, that's not coming from property taxes, that's strictly from the interest on that investment. And so if we were to have spent that, then our roads reserve would not be in the black where it is today.
Right.
So the $2 million annually has been going to the roads reserve, which is now, one of our healthier reserves because we put this strategy in place, recognizing that we had a big hole there. And so part of that is to maximize every dollar. We know that we have to look at our investment strategy. So our team's looking into that right now, and we're going to be bringing some more information back, but because we recognize that every source of income that's not coming from property taxes or from user charges, and maximizing that is the best thing that we can do for resident affordability. So we're really reviewing that strongly and taking into account to see how we can maximize every dollar. But it's been a significant help to our reserves that we wouldn't otherwise have had we spent it.
So if council came to you, next Tuesday and said, listen, we want to spend this money, we want to tap into the principal, even if it's just half, Amy, it's just half. We want to take half out, put it into the reserves. We're still going to have, 30 some odd million in there. Your recommendation is?
No. Simply put, no. I think that our financial flexibility in the coming years and the amount of debt that we're going to be taking on is going to be so limiting for us that if we were to get rid of that, safety net, I'll call it, we would be really, really stuck. So having that money in the bank and having that interest income is floating our reserves, but it also gives us, when our debt capacity is maxed out and there is no more, if we need dramatic emergency repairs on one of our facilities, that's the only place we can go to get it.
Right.
If we don't have that, there is no repair on that facility in an emergency.
And it works to preserve, the dollar value we have in the bank, which goes towards our credit rating. Absolutely. Therefore, what we can take out in debt and loans as well, like it serves a lot of purposes. So yeah, legacy fund should be there to stay. I don't plan on touching it. So hopefully that's the plan of future councils for years to come. But you just spoke about like some assets and so on. So one of your favorite subjects is asset management, and that's interesting. What's your deal with asset management?
Yeah,
Why do you like
it makes me sound super cool. But no, asset management is something I'm very passionate about. And so, a number of municipalities just like us are kind of struggling with it right now. It's fair to say it doesn't sound like a lot of fun, but we are working on our non-core assets, which is going to be coming forward to council for July of 2024. And essentially what that will do, we'll add that to our phase 1 core assets. And so we'll have in one document, in one spot, all of our assets, their age, their condition, their life, when they need to be replaced, how much is it going to cost us to replace them? And then in 2025, we'll bring our financing plan back, which is going to say, how are we going to fund the replacement of all of those assets? And it's also where council will get to decide what the service level is. So what condition do we want our roads at? What condition do we want to make sure our facilities stay at? How many community halls and arenas and EMS spaces and fire halls and all those things do we need for our community? What is that level of service? And once that bar is set, in an ideal world, that will then feed our capital plan.
Right.
So our 10-year forecast will be built out following the asset management plan so that all those assets are replaced when they need to be. And then that will trigger that savings account that we were talking about. Okay, if I need to replace, X fire hall in 2032, how much money do I need to put in my reserve now to make sure that I can do that? And then we'll build it out for all of our assets, and it will all work harmoniously. And although it will be a lot of money, it will be wonderful. From the accounting nerd in me will be very happy.
I just figured it out. It's not asset management. It's the policy. It's the plan that you're nerding out over.
Yeah, that's what it is. All translates into our capital budget.
I got it. Okay, I'm relating to you on another level now. I just didn't understand the fixation with asset management. It's not asset management. It's the plan.
Yeah,
I like it. Okay. So my last question, I have 2 more things to ask you. One, I want to know, fill people in on what it's like. How does our staff build a budget? So I'm a counselor. I'm bugging the team to go put new washrooms in Turkey Point or a pickleball court in wherever, and they are feeling the pressure from Mayor Martin. It's not in the budget yet. but they've done community assessment, or it's an emergency. Something's happened that was unplanned. How does our staff, our senior leadership team, build out a budget? How do they get money to do things?
So that's a really good question, and we take a lot of time and a lot of detailed review of all the budget lines before they come forward. So, we have a defined process for each of our budgets that, for our capital budget, for example, that comes to council in October, we kick it off probably in the springtime.
Yeah.
And we start working with departments, we start meeting with them all, they build out their needs, then we bring it all to the senior leadership team, we sit down with them, they go through line by line, they push things out, they work through all of the details, then we take that back, we put it into our financial system, and we would flip it all to reserve funding. And so then that would turn our reserves obviously to the red. And so then we go through optimizing every line of that funding plan to determine how can we best fund all of that? Where do we need to take debt? Where don't we? How does it work best? And we really spend a lot of time on building that out to make sure that we're maximizing everything, keeping all of our reserves above zero. And what does that do to our debt levels? Because at the end of the day, we apply whatever grants we get, we apply our reserves to the best of our ability, and whatever's left is debt. Mm-hmm. And so we deal with that, and then that all comes forward to council with our plan and our report, and we package it all up. But throughout that process and throughout the year, there's obviously emergencies that come up. There are projects that run over budget. There are emergency repairs that we didn't foresee. And I always kind of imagine that there's, a manager somewhere in the county sitting there over their phone, nervous and feeling like they have to call the treasurer who's going to yell at them for overspending money.
That's how we want them to feel. Good job.
So, there's some of that as well. People will call and say, shoot, this just happened. What do we do? And so
they really believe in the project,
right.
But maybe it's not. You are seeing this holistic view of all these other competing priorities, and you're going, hey, listen, so-and-so in such and such department, your problem's really not that big.
Right. And maybe we have, multi-million dollar projects, and we have very small, $10,000, $20,000 projects that we can, be a bit more flexible and sort of different numbers for those kinds of things, certainly. Or we might have, a project that closed under budget, or we might have something else that we can assist with because, like you said, we see the bigger picture and we see all of it at the same time. And so we try to work with people where we can. But usually that results in, us giving people a hard time, and then they have to write their own council report and come forward and figure out, seek approval for a budget amendment.
That's what we like. And do you good cop, bad cop it with anyone in your finance team? Are you the bad cop?
I'm definitely the bad cop. No, 100%.
Is it Chris?
Yeah, I'm the bad cop.
And
cop? I would say that there's other people on my team that are the good cop for sure. Okay. I'm definitely bad cop.
When you start to get sticky notes on your desk from members of your own team asking for money for a different department, that someone got to the good cop, and you're that front line of defense. You're no.
And I'm the last one that will probably say no, or then they'll have to go back and say, no, sorry, Amy said no.
Yeah, which is great. That's character building. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to say something, and then I've got one final question for you. So things that the public wouldn't know about you is that, in the summer we had a staff barbecue and we had a dunk tank, and Amy got in it. And Amy also had one of the biggest lineups from our other staff members to try and sink her, probably because she does hold the line on the budget so darn well. So that was the only way they could get a little payback on her. But she is an exceptional leader with her team and has a really good sense of humor. And they have some really good jokes that I'll just let them keep to themselves. But they are funny down there, and we're lucky to have them. But Amy also has really strong conviction. And Amy gives me peace of mind that if I'm not here, or this entire council is not here, that she'll answer the questions the same way. She'll take the same position. She'll hold that same line with that next term of council. She is not rolling over. She's here for the betterment of the community and that financial vision for Norfolk. So I want to just close out with kind of getting your long-term vision for the county. What does that vision look like, over the next 5, 10, and maybe it's 50 years? And what do you want to share with the residents and taxpayers of Norfolk, I guess, on property tax increases in general?
Thanks for that. And for the plan, I'm, again, this doesn't make me sound super cool, but I'm really excited about where we're heading. I am immensely proud of my team and of the work that they're doing. I think that there's a lot of really good things, coming out of our team. I think that coming up to a really challenging situation can help to show you what you're made of and what you're capable of. And I think that that's where we're at right now. We're in a really challenging situation, but I think that we really have the team in place to meet it. And so, like 5 years out, I think that we need a solid plan in place for our water infrastructure and secured funding from other levels of government so that we can action on that plan. I also think that we need our asset management plan in full swing, and that harmonious integration between the asset management plan and our capital forecast that I was talking about. I think within 5 years, that's something that we really need to strive for. In 10 years, I'd like to see our reserve balances becoming more sufficient. They won't be all the way there, but they should be well on their way. And I'd like to see our debt projections being reduced to something more reasonable.
Yeah.
In 50 years, this may be a wish list and a rose-colored glasses sort of approach, but I would love to see our reserve balances being capable of replacing all of our assets when they're due. And so every time something's due, we replace it out of reserves. And that way, we're only using debt when it's appropriate and when it's feasible. And debt can be a good thing. There are times when utilizing debt to fund a project is a good thing, and the way that it spreads out costs. But I'd like to see us have that option and not be using it out of necessity because we don't have that option.
I want to be the mayor in 50 years. Like that's when you work on cool projects. That's when you see stuff come to fruition. That's when, but that being said, it is the public's responsibility to then vet the next term of council and the one after that and the one after that and so on for 50 years, because really these decisions that we're making, they might seem small one at a time here, there, and everywhere. We might be trying to decrease the property taxes by just 1% if we take out of the reserves, or just 2% if we do this. And one bad move can really undo all the great work that we've been working on and set us off on the wrong direction. So to achieve that 50-year dream, we really have to stay on top of it, and the public should really care about municipal financing and understand it.
Absolutely. It all translates into tax increases at the end of the day, because we don't have a lot of other options to fund things. And so the more that we can be transparent and upfront and share information with the public, the more we can engage them, the better it's all going to be at the end of the day.
Yeah. Anything you want to talk about I didn't touch on?
No, I think that's it. I'm happy to get this information out there and to share it with the public in different format. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, hopefully they listen to us. We'll see. Okay, thank you very much for joining. I really appreciate your time. And the public can find you and your team. We're always available at the Norfolk County building, and all your information's online. But really appreciate your insight, and Norfolk County's super lucky to have you.
Thank you.